I want to talk about Shelley Duvall's Fairy Tale Theater because I was obsessed with this thing. And when we first met and I found out that you did that, I was like, okay, I'm impressed. And then I saw it. You were so fabulous.
I was cute.
No, talk about that show.
Well. After Dog Day Afternoon, when we filmed that and it finished in November, so here we are supposed to be on the hot August Dog Day, shooting in November where we had to eat ice so we wouldn't vaporize, and I did start taking classes at Hunter, and so I was taking classes at Hunter, but what I had decided was I don't want to be an actor. I still don't want to be an actor. I want to be a crew guy. Because I love the way the crew, the camaraderie, because a lot of the guys who worked on Law and Disorder were also the same guys who worked on Dog Day, because the New York crews are, much more smaller, and they're families, and I wanted that. And I knew that there was one of my father's friends, an off-and-on client, was about to start another movie, so I called up and I asked Martin Scorsese if I could work with him on Taxi Driver. And I became a production assistant. So I spent the rest of that spring and all summer working on Taxi Driver, hopefully going to then go to the Directors Guild apprentice program the following March. Well, I also worked with my dad, so in September, Taxi Driver finished in late August. In September, the New York Film Festival started, and I was there in my tuxedo with my father, and I was working, in the press office. And a guy came up to me and said, I just saw a sneak of Dog Day. Who's your agent? I said, I don't have an agent. I'm going to go to the Directors Guild program. And he said, well, we could sign you. You could still do that, and you could maybe make some money in the between. So it was Bill, I can't remember his last name. He was the head of ICM in New York. Bill Barnes. And so I signed with ICM, and 2 weeks later, they got me a job called Bernice Bobs Her Hair, which was an F. Scott Fitzgerald short story that starred Shelley Duvall, Veronica Cartwright, Dennis Christopher, Patrick Reynolds, who was Shelley's boyfriend at the time, had a small role in it. And I played Otis Ormond, and I was the little boy who had a crush on Bernice. And
I saw this film.
We shot it in Savannah. It took place in 1919, so it was all the wigs and everything, and I just loved all these people. And then they all went back to Hollywood. We shot it was like October, November, and then Shelley and Patrick came to New York for Christmas and New Year's. And Patrick only came for New Year's, but Shelley came earlier. And she and I just spent the entire week together, bopping around and playing and having fun. And then at New Year's Eve, we were at New Year's Eve at Woody Allen's New Year's Eve party at the Harkness Pavilion, and it was about 2 a.m. And Patrick and Shelley, were talking, and they said, "Hey, look, when do you have to go back to school?" And I said, "February." And they said, "Well, why don't you come out to L.A. with us when we go back the day after tomorrow?" And, and I said, "Well, my agents would love it. They want me to go out to L.A." And so I went home and asked my parents, and they said, "Sure, absolutely." So they paid for me to fly out with Patrick and Shelley. We flew out, and it was 9 years later that I left. But Shelley, I lived with them. Patrick was the heir to the R.J. Reynolds tobacco fortune. And he lived in a castle in Hollywood, looking over Lake Hollywood, right below the Hollywood sign. And
I know that castle.
It was the house that the man who built Hollywoodland built as his own. It was called Wolf's Lair.
That would be another house I've broken into.
That was a nice house to break into.
No, I only broke into their yards.
Them, I was going to stay a month, and I stayed. I lived with them until July, when they finally broke up. And at one point during that, like May, June, they went to Europe to try and salvage their relationship. And I was left in the house alone with the 5 Great Danes, the birds, the fish, the little Cairn Terrier named Waldo, the Mercedes, the charge account at the Beechwood Market, And so that was, they came back and the relationship didn't work. And then Shelley and I moved out. She bought Loretta Young's house off of Fountain Avenue in West Hollywood. And Loretta had bought that for her and her sister. So it was basically a duplex. So Shelley lived on one side and I lived on the other side. And then about after a month, she said, "Oh, another friend of mine needs a place to live," and it was somebody we had met up when we were living at the castle. It was Pat Ast, who was one of the the Warhol actresses.
Wait, I have to stop for a minute. You lived on Fountain?
It was Lapeer, I think.
I lived on Fountain.
It was right on the corner of Lapeer and Fountain was where Loretta Young lived, and so we were living there, and then all of a sudden Shelley said, "I got a movie. I'm going to New York." And so that was fine. She went, and we were continuing doing, and I was, doing my acting jobs and doing whatever I had to do. And Pat and I were sharing one side of the house, and Shelley had the other side. And then all of a sudden, we get a phone call. I met somebody. I'm moving to New York. She was in New York to do Annie Hall. And she was out with my sister, actually, having dinner at Elaine's when this guy came up to her and said, "Hi, we're in the same movie." And it was Paul Simon. And Shelley and Paul wound up living together for almost 2 years. And so she sold the house, and I went from a castle to Loretta Young's house to a beat-up couch in North Hollywood. And finally, I got my own place. And then a friend of mine was going off to do a movie in Mexico, and so they said, "Oh, well, he'd be gone for 6 months. Stay at his place." So I moved into the Speedway in Venice, which was probably the most decadent place I ever lived, right on the boardwalk in Venice. And I lived there for about 4 months until I finally found my own place, a little bungalow in Hollywood, and stayed there. But anyway, so Shelley and I always stayed friends. And then when she started Fairy Tale Theater, which, it was always one of her great loves, she was amazing. She got people like Mick Jagger and the Monty Python guys, and Meryl Streep, and every
Bernadette Peters.
all these stars put together, and then they would do these fairy tales, and Shelley was in a lot of them, but a lot of them she wasn't. She would narrate it, or she would always introduce it, and it was a huge successful hit. And I did one called "The Boy Who Left Home to Find Out About the Shivers," which means fear, and it was with Peter MacNicol and Dana Hill and Jeff Corey, the great acting teacher, and Vincent Price and Frank Zappa, and it was so much fun.
You are seriously wonderful in it.
But it was great. And then Shelley went on to do another season, and then she did a whole other thing called Tall Tales and Legends, like Paul Bunyan and things like that. So this was great, and unfortunately, Hollywood fucked her. Which is one reason that she's in the situation she's in now. They basically just kind of, screwed her on monies and financials, and it was really painful. And she's, she should have been a huge star with this, and going through all the things about being a woman producer, trying to put all this together, and getting screwed by the accountants and everybody else, and then the Northridge earthquake. Which kind of really semi-demolished her house. And Shelley's always, as I said, living with all those animals. She had animals. A lot of the animals died when, the things crushed. And so she basically kind of started to lose it and moved, picked up and moved to Texas, which is where she's from and where she still lives. And, she's been going through a lot of problems, but she's still Shelley. I still talk to her every couple of weeks. I'm going down to visit her next month when I get back from Cannes, and she's not the olive oil one knows. She's a lot of weight. She's lost a tooth, but she's still Shelley. And
it's really sad because Hollywood does that to a lot of people.
A lot of women.
Yes. Very
yes.
Women. I'll never forget, I think I was like 14 and I went to Brentano's, and Katherine Grayson was there. And I was a huge Katherine Grayson fan, and she was like 300 pounds. But There's still an aura about them. They're
I mean, Shelley, no matter all the problems, and there was a big thing with Dr. Phil came down because Dr. Phil was going to rescue her, and they put her on a plane and flew her to L.A. for his TV, and I mean, it really freaked her out. So she came out looking, really not very good, but it was.
But
all
it should freak her
manipulation.
out
It was all manipulation.
that man is scum personified.
But Shelley, not only, and again, she wasn't ever going to be an actress. She was trying to sell her husband's paintings. When Altman and his crew were down in Houston for Brewster McCloud, and she went to a cocktail party because she heard there was going to be movie people there, and trying to sell her husband's paintings and art with her big eyelashes, which is what she wore in Brewster. They basically filmed Shelley doing that. And then so she did Brewster, and then I think the next film Altman cast her right away in Thieves Like Us, and that turned her into an actress. She won Cannes, she did things like fairy tale theater, and she is quite incredible.
I could talk to you for a million years and we could keep on talking about stories, but I want to get some of the things that I know that you're working on now in. You had a son, an amazing, amazing son. Can you talk a little bit about him? And from what I understand, you have a book coming out about him?
Yeah, well, just quickly, Nick was 14 years old. He was a hockey player. He played the bagpipes. He didn't really play any other sports. He was up at camp up in the Berkshires and wound up coming down with meningococcal meningitis. And basically, in most cases, it kills within 24 to 48 hours. It's one of the fastest multiplying bacteria in the body, and when the bacteria are dying as they're multiplying, they put a toxin into the blood which causes clotting. So your ends, your capillaries, your fingers, your penis, your ears, everything starts clotting, including your organs. All like the heart, and luckily, he was at a camp that had a doctor on staff who gave him an IV right away, even though it was against protocol for her to do it. But she just knew that this was some kind of blood thing when she saw these blotches on Nick. He was brought to a local hospital. The ambulance, he was not going to make it. They had to change ambulances in the middle of the road and put him into an ICU ambulance to get him to the hospital. Doctor just looked at him, called a medevac helicopter, and they helicoptered him to Bay State Medical Center, where for 3 days, he died, his heart stopped, he had last rites. He survived, which he shouldn't have, basically. And he was the following week, when they took out his tube, all of a sudden he developed 108 fever, which he had for almost the entire day and a half. They thought his brain might go. Well, by the time he got, out of New York Hospital where they transferred him to, he had quadruple amputations. He was amputated mid-arm, between the wrist and the hand on both, and through the knees on both. And he was extensively grafted from all of his real skin that survived, had to go on to grafting his, dead skin. He quickly, after 3 months in New York Hospital, we took him to Burke Rehab because it was near where he was going to go to high school, where he was going to be the junior varsity hockey goalie. And there was all these stories about Nick and hockey. And one day, this guy, Victor Calisi, who just finished working for the last couple of years as the New York City Commissioner of Disabilities, came into the hospital with a sled and with some sticks and said, I've been reading that Nick wants to play hockey again, and good for him if he can. He said, but have you guys ever heard of sled hockey? Which we hadn't, and Victor was on the U.S. sled hockey team at Nagano. And so we started looking into that, and then, after another couple of weeks, when the rehab facility was letting us take Nick home for lunches, we would take him to Westchester Skating Academy, call Victor, who would come up with 3 or 4 guys and some sleds. We would take sweat socks, because he didn't have prosthetics. we would take sweat socks and put them over his stumps and then duct tape the sticks to his sweat socks, and he'd go out on the ice, and the grin on his face was great. And when he got out, I mean, that's all he wanted to do was play sled hockey, and he wanted to become great. And he and Victor actually started the New York Rangers sled hockey team because through some friends, Rod Gilbert, who was the legendary number 7 of the Rangers, his stepdaughter used to work for me, and through other friends, we all knew each other. And he used, even before Nick got sick, he was inviting Nick to go to the Rangers Christmas skates. So when Nick was still skating. And so afterwards, everybody supported him. Adam Graves was one of Nick's great mentors, number 9, and Nick always was number 9 in every sport he ever played. And he did that, and they started this, and he just wanted to get good at this. And he came back, from the hospital, and he went going back to regular school, not the school in Croton, but Stepanak, the one where he was going to go because his hockey friends were all there. And it was 25 miles away, but he still would go every day. And he never wore the prosthetics because he had too many scars for the electro things on his arms to work. They were very erratic and they were heavy. And he would wear his legs sometimes, but they usually made him bleed because his grafting was so bad. So he never really wore his prosthetics. And we had socks, things built for him that would stick. The sticks would go right into him, so he could pull when he was playing hockey. After about a couple years of that, Victor said, Nick, there's this other sport that you should try. And this is only, he got sick in '99. We're talking about like 2003, 2004 right now. There's this other sport you should try. And he says, no, I just want to get really good at this. I want to make the U.S. team. He said, try this, Nick. And he procrastinated. My son, I would smack him around and say, come on, Nick, try this. And so finally, Victor brought us a sport chair. And so finally we went down to Hackensack, New Jersey, which is where the New York wheelchair rugby team would practice. And Nick watched for about half an hour, rolled over to the coach and said, I think I can go in, coach. And he went in and came out with that same grin that he had that first time he was on the ice. And he goes, Dad, I think I could be really good at this sport. I'm getting teary-eyed. And within a year, he was on the U.S. development team. Within 2 years, he was on the U.S. Paralympic team. In 2008, he was the MVP of the gold medal game in Beijing. The game was going on, and as soon as the game was over and we won the gold medal, I had to tell them and the team and my daughter and my niece and my mother, who were all there, that my wife was dying. And she died the next day while we were on a plane back with Nick wearing his gold medal. But life goes on, and life went on. And when Nick first got sick, we used to say, he's still Nick. And that's what we used to tell Olivia, when she would be a little nervous at first going to see him, he's still Nick. And we said, this is just our new normal. And that's what we said when Nancy died. It's just our new normal. She had liver cancer. She didn't do anything wrong. We didn't do anything wrong. And we were all fine because that's the way life is.
I have to tell you, Nick was the most amazing human I think I've ever met. Because despite everything, Nick loved life.
Loved life. And he was never depressed. Some people would get, they have spinal injuries or something like that. They sit in their room for 2 years before they move because they're just, a lot of the guys on his team, this is what they said. It took me 2 years to get out. Nick was still in rehab and we were having him play sports. He never was depressed. When he first woke up from his coma and found out that he lost his arms and legs, which he had to tell us. We weren't supposed to tell him. So we waited till he told us. And once he did, they quickly brought him out of the, induced coma. 5 days after he woke up, a friend of ours was there who just had LASIK surgery. And Nancy and the surgeon, Yurt, and Dr. Yurt, and our friend Lori were in the corner thinking Nick was asleep. And Nancy said, so Lori, can you see? Is it really better? And all of a sudden from the bed you hear, quick, Laura, how many fingers am I holding up? And he was holding up his stump. and everybody started crying, and the doctor said he'll be fine. And he was. He was never depressed. He would get angry. He would get frustrated, with the arms and with things. But he drove his own car. He used a cell phone. He didn't need any special things to eat. He didn't use an electric wheelchair. He used his, arms and forearms to use it, just push his regular wheelchair. God forbid you asked, you tried to move it for him, or, give him a wheelchair seat at a restaurant, because he wasn't a spinal person, so he could just climb out of his wheelchair and into a booth or a chair. And
I went to dinner with him once, and he was the perfect gentleman. He opened the door. He made sure that I was sat first and I was comfortable. He was and is still one of the most amazing people I have ever met in my life.
Amazing. And and I can say that about my son. He was pretty damn amazing. And he wound up speaking. He traveled the world. My wife, Nancy, was one of the 5 founders of the National Meningitis Association, because we found out after the fact that there was a vaccine that could potentially prevent meningococcal meningitis. And at that point, back in 1999, 2000, the Army was getting it, and that was about it. And so Nancy got laws enacted on her own in Connecticut and New York and Vermont, where boarding schools, colleges, summer camps, if you're going, you need the vaccine. And then she joined with other parents who had the same thing, and they joined the National Meningitis Association, and they now it's the law of the land. You can't go into a dorm without having the meningitis vaccine. And so Nick and Nancy would travel and talk, and then Nick continued to talk. Novartis was a drug company that had the vaccine. They used to send Nick all over the world, and they were sold to GSK. And Nick was on 9-10 flights a week, traveling to Detroit, and then in a car to Ann Arbor, and then on a plane to Chicago, where they would speak. And it got to the point that he was branded by the FDA. And so he was an official brand for the meningitis vaccine, and he couldn't talk to colleges or high schools or anything anymore because he was an official medical brand. So he could only talk to medical personnel. So it was doctors and nurses all over the world. So he spoke. He was doing that. He was still playing rugby. His Phoenix team were national champions 4 years in a row. He was coaching the Philadelphia team. And unfortunately, he died in 2001, which is, where we were going with this. Sorry if I was a little abrupt with that.
Is there a book? I heard there's a book coming out.
There's a gentleman named Gerard Donovan, who our friend Errol Rappaport connected me with, because Errol knew that Gerard was writing about with Black Tie magazine. There was a connection there about philanthropy, and Errol started talking to Gerard about the national meningitis and how about, we got all these laws passed, and, this was philanthropy and doing that. And so Gerard started looking into it, and basically, he just sent me the first 70 pages, and we've just left the hospital. This book's going to be like War and Peace. It's going to be an epic. But yeah, Nick died. He was actually on his way to Ethiopia to consult on a movie, because I'm a movie press agent, and I was in Ethiopia mentoring young filmmakers. And this one filmmaker said to me, I said, so what was your first, project about? And he said, oh, it's something you probably would have never heard of it. And I said, try me. He said, it's called wheelchair basketball, and we did it, out in the boonies in Ethiopia. And I said, let me introduce you to my son. And they had talked, and they started developing it. And Nick was on his way down to Ethiopia, but he died. We was at a friend's pool in April of 2015, and basically because the disease affected everything, all of his organs back in 1999. His heart just stopped. Even though he played sled hockey, played wheelchair rugby, was on planes, traveling around nonstop, in and out of airports, pushing himself and his rugby chair, he died. but he was a pretty amazing kid. And the book is going to come out. And the guy's movie, I just found this out because
Wait, are we now on to what you're promoting right now?
no. The guy who from Ethiopia, because this was 2 years ago, he's just showed his short that was inspired by Nick at a film festival in Nottingham, England. He flew from Ethiopia to Nottingham, England for a documentary festival, and he posted this whole big thing about his film as the credits were rolling. And I'm thinking back and the inspiration of Nick and how Nick's college friends had met via online, met this filmmaker, Mikius, and they raised money. Nick's college roommates raised money for this movie to happen, so to keep Nick's legacy going. And I haven't even seen it yet. And so it just premiered like last week in England. It's a 12-minute short, but it's about disabilities, and it's all inspired by Nick.
Now, I know I have to get you to Westchester, and I'm praying to God I haven't gone that much over. Do you want to talk before we close out about your film that you're promoting right now?
Yeah, I mean, actually, this has been a very, very busy month. I had a film called Farewell, Mr. Hoffman, which was a wonderful film with Daniel Auteuil, Sarah Girardot. It took place in Paris in 1940. The Nazis had just entered. Mr. Hoffman was a Jewish jeweler, and so had Holocaust themes. And so I was pushing that. I couldn't get anything for it. And I think one reason is because of the Holocaust theme and what's going on in Israel, that the media was afraid to be pushing a Holocaust thing while this. Anyway,
No, well, I'm gonna talk about that for 1 minute.
1 second. It was an excellent movie. It played 16 weeks in South Florida. It played 5 weeks in New York without one review because it was such a good movie, word of mouth. So anyway, I was working on that. Then I had another one that was supposed to open in October, October 13th, and of course, October 7th was the attack in Israel, and this was a German-Israeli lesbian romantic comedy called Kiss Me Kosher. So we obviously pulled it from October. It would not have been the right thing. But we opened that last week, and that also got good reviews, and it did decent business in New York. It played, and it's streaming right now. And then what I'm doing now is I'm leaving for Los Angeles tomorrow. This weekend I had a movie open at the Cinema Village called Beyond the Raging Sea. We're opening in Los Angeles this coming Friday. And tonight I've got the director doing a film class up in Westchester. And I've been involved in this movie since 2018. And it's a true story. It's a documentary. It's about these two Egyptian adventurers. One of them was the first Egyptian to climb Mount Everest. He leads adventure things to the Amazon, to Antarctica. Another one was the Arab world's fastest man. He was a triathlete who was diagnosed with diabetes 2 weeks before the Olympics, so he couldn't run. And
Hey, why couldn't he run?
The doctors said no, whatever. And, but the two of them, both named Omar, so we have Team O2, decided to row across the Atlantic Ocean in a race that happens, I think, biannually or every 2 years or something, called the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge. And so these two guys rowed across the Atlantic Ocean. They've never been rowers. Again, this is not what they did. In a 7-meter boat, they made it 9 days and 600 miles and capsized in an uncapsizable boat. And all of a sudden, they were floating in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in a life raft that was deflating for 14 hours, until a ship had diverted to pick them up. And then it took them another 4 or 5 hours to get them on the ship because they had to rappel up the side of this cargo ship. And they were doing it for refugee awareness, about all the refugees who were making the dangerous crossings, between this Horn of Africa and Yemen, and between, Africa and Europe. And they wanted to gain awareness for that, which is why they did this row. And it's a terrific film. And as I said, it's playing tonight and tomorrow still at Cinema Village. And then next week, if anybody in LA sees this, we open on Friday at the Laemmle Santa Monica. And Marco and the two guys, because they lived, of course, are going to be there. And we'll do Q&As all weekend, and then it'll stream. So yes, so I'm working, I'm busy, and now I'm getting ready to go to Cannes. I'm going to Cannes with this group called the International Emerging Film Talent Association. And I've been working with them since 2007. And that's how I met Mikias in Ethiopia, because IEFTA mentors emerging film talent from emerging economies. And we do a program at Cannes, and we do it in Berlin, we do it in El Gouna, in Egypt, called Refugee Voices in Film, where we show films by refugees, about refugees, displaced people. We're doing a big panel in Cannes with an international journalist named Hadley Gamble, is going to be moderating the panel, and we have a very special guest who's coming, as well as a filmmaker who was a displaced filmmaker from Bosnia. And we're connected with the Arab Cinema Center, where we're going to honor UNHCR, which is the United Nations, the UN Refugee Agency that looks after the refugees, and they also help produce Beyond the Raging Sea. So it's all interconnected. So I'm busy. I'm going to Cannes, and then hopefully I have the summer off. I can sit by my pool.
I am so grateful that A, you are my friend, and B, that you reorganized your life to be with me today.
Yeah. Well, it's a
I'm
pleasure.
so grateful for this.
And I've talked too much.
No, I'm praying that I didn't make you late for your
I don't know
debut.
what time it is. I might have to get out of here.
I'm Susanna Bowling. I want to thank Magda Katz for filming and allowing us to look good and sound good, to Romel Gopez and the Edison Hotel, Errol Rappaport for introducing us in the first place. This is live from the Hotel Edison. Times Square Chronicles presents. Thank you so much for being with us.